Hunters don't usually leave coffee as a goodbye. Especially not your coffee. The cup sat in the middle of the metal table like a dare, steam threading into the cold fluorescent air. My gloves, were folded beside it, fingertips aligned like I had set them down myself before stepping into a dream. Cameras blinked their red eyelids in the corners. Rain braided down the glass wall behind the one-way mirror, painting the city outside into a smear of gray and light. I flexed my wrists out of habit. No cuffs. Skin cool where metal should have remembered me. Someone had turned the air conditioner down to morgue and left the interrogation room dressed for a party I wasn't invited to. Across from me sat the hunter. He wore the collarless black of Gray Line investigators, no insignia, no shine, the corporate idea of stealth made into uniform. Broad shoulders, a posture that said I can move faster than you think and I don't need to prove it. His hair was a shade too long for company policy, damp at the ends like the rain had followed him inside and decided to stay. His eyes were the patient color of a storm, about to choose a direction. The file in front of him was open to a form with blanks filled in by a hand that didn't hesitate. My legal beta designation. My aliases. A neat block of charges that looked almost hygienic. Illicit entry. Software tampering. Possession of obsolete lockpicks. Suspicion of trafficking in heritage mechanisms. He signed the bottom, then drew a lazy line through his own signature. Ink scored paper. The sound was a soft cut. "Run," he said, as if telling me the weather. "But if I catch you again, we'll have to talk." His voice was a dry, thermal current. I waited for the usual prickle under my skin, dominance pressure, the reflex to lower my gaze, the urge I trained out of myself 1,000 times in 1,000 rooms like this. Nothing hit. If anything, the air between us went smoother, like it had been ironed. I smiled with my mouth and not my teeth. "You're very generous for a corporate hound." One of his brows raised. A flick, amusement almost. "Gray Line doesn't keep hounds," he said. "We keep contracts." "And cages?" "Doors," he said. "Some of them open." The AC thrummed, a mechanical heartbeat out of sync with mine. I reached for the coffee. It wasn't terrible, bitter enough to feel honest, hot enough to remind my tongue I was still alive. He watched me drink, like it might be evidence. "What's your name, Gray Line?" I asked. Not the one in his file. I wanted the one he used when he slept. His mouth made a small decision. Meyn Calder. He let me have the sound of it. Hunters don't hand you their names. It felt like the first step on a bridge that might hold or might not. "Liam," I said, because I was done with giving the city fake syllables today. "You've read that, I know." Meyn tapped his pen against the margin of my file once. A clock tick. "I have." We looked at each other for a count of 3. In another room, alarms might have started. In this one, a camera light shifted from red to amber and back to red, and I tasted steel in the back of my throat. From the air, from the table, from everything about this place designed to file edges into compliances. "Run," he said again, softer. Today is the last time I ask nicely. It wasn't a threat. It was certainty wearing good manners. He was sure of my path, like a cartographer who had mapped every alley I'd disappear into. He was sure I would live, because he had decided it. Something in me should have flared, anger, fear. But what came was colder, curiosity, the dangerous kind that makes you turn the key again, just to feel the lock satisfy you. I stood. My knees said I had been here too long. A fine tremor in my fingers said adrenaline had missed me and was now catching up late. The coffee was half gone. I left it there like a promise I couldn't keep. At the door, I paused and turned just enough to see the pen in his hand. Stainless barrel, knurled grip, a tiny nick near the clip where the world had taken a bite. Something about the way he held it, second finger crooked, thumb anchored, said it belonged to him, not the room. I crossed back in 2 casual steps. "Souvenir," I said, and plucked it from his fingers. Meyn's gaze dropped to my hand, then returned to my face with the weight of a choice. He didn't move to stop me. Fine lines arranged themselves at the corners of his eyes, not quite a smile. "Careful," he said. "It leaks." "So do cages," I said. The pen was cool against my palm. As I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket, my other hand dipped to the underside of the table and left something smaller than a rice grain in the seam where metal met metal. A little ear with a shorter life expectancy than some houseplants. It would wake when I was ready for it. His eyes flicked, just once, to the table's edge. If he noticed, he didn't care. Or he wanted me to think he didn't. Either way, the game had rules now. I like rules. You can bend rules. You can break them more elegantly when you've memorized their grammar. The hallway outside the interrogation room smelled of disinfectant and expensive air. Greyline headquarters spread itself like a quiet monument, glass-walled. Corridors, floors that absorbed footsteps, art that looked like weather. The elevators whispered. Someone down the corridor wore a neutralizing patch. The citrus and alcohol tang of it diluted the sharper musk I associated with alphas in uniforms, and the smell of everyone became the smell of no one. Filters hummed in the ductwork to flatten adrenaline spikes, the way the city flattened rivers into canals and told them to behave. I passed a security station where a woman in a headset looked not at me, but through me, eyes tracking subvocals only she could hear. She had a black band on her wrist that could flood her system with synthetic calm if the wrong hormones bloomed in the room. Greyline loved managing bodies. Bodies were spreadsheets, variables, inputs and outputs. The lobby was a cathedral of glass. Rain scratched at the high panes, and beyond the revolving doors, the city edited itself into evening. Hollow ads ghosted across wet pavement. Traffic performed its constant ballet. A kiosk near the exit sold disposable scent filters in chic matte packets. Blend for dates. Mute for interviews. Shield for walking past packs without becoming a conversation. I didn't need one. I had my own biology, inconvenient and secret. The gene I didn't order and couldn't return. The one that turned the volume down on other people's dominance when I didn't want to be told what to be. I adjusted my hood and watched my reflection make the lobby look emptier than it was. My pulse steadied. Coffee warmed a line down my center. My tongue found the ghost of metal again, the AC's taste, the room's bite. I let the doors spin me out into rain and static. Street. Water gathered in the notch at the base of my throat and ran under the collar of my jacket. The city's noise was honest here. Tires in puddles, a siren pealing somewhere that wasn't my problem, the shush of people wanting to be inside other people's stories. Neon rebuilt itself on the wet asphalt and admired the result. I walked. Around the corner, I cut through an alley that smelled like old bread and wet cardboard. The drone of a vent unit filled the narrow space, the same pitch as the room's conditioner but human, fallible. My shoulders loosened. My skin remembered it belonged to me. I stopped under a rusting fire escape and looked back. No one followed. Of course not. You don't tell someone to run and then ruin the music by stomping after them. Not if you're Meyn Calder. Not if you have a plan you want me to find, like a note hidden in a library book. I touched the pocket with his pen. It sat against my ribs like a second, steadier heartbeat. He was sure I'd come back. Not for the pen. For the conversation he had promised as punishment. For the door he'd called open. For the map he thought he'd drawn of me. He was a hunter. I was a thief who never learned to love cages because I always found the hinges first. Maybe that was what bothered me most. The door had been open before I stood up. The choice had been made before he spoke. My choice? His? A bus sighed past at the mouth of the alley, lights turning raindrops into coins. I could disappear 3 different ways before the crosswalk changed. I cataloged the exits the way other people counted blessings. The tiny device under the table would be sleeping, waiting for my breath to become a key. I pictured Meyn's hand, the half-crescent of ink on his finger where the pen had rested, the care in the way he said my name. Not reverent. Not cruel. Precise. When someone opens a cage, it isn't about freedom. It's about who will want to close it first. I stepped back into the rain and let the city take me whole. The cafe was a glass box pretending to be warm. Rain painted slow commas down the windows. Inside, the air smelled of roast and citrus cleaner. The neutralizing. Filters doing their diligent best to turn people into furniture. Good. Furniture didn't chase you. I was 3 sips into a decent Americano when the door sighed and a draft of wet cold shouldered in ahead of him. Meyn Calder folded out of the weather like he'd been hung there to dry, dark coat, darker, gaze, a newspaper tucked under his arm as if the century hadn't moved on without it. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. Predators walk like the room knows better than to get in their way. He chose the table by the window back to the glass, profile to me. The paper opened with a whisper. The rain amplified itself behind him like applause. I could have left. I didn't. Instead, I stood, took my cup, and slid into the table beside his. Close enough for the filters to iron the air between our bodies even flatter. Close enough to smell the wet wool of his coat, the faint metal of his watch, the human underneath. Copycat, I said, and raised my hand to get the barista's attention. I'll have what he's having. He didn't look. You don't know what I'm having. Something that tastes like penance, I said. You look the type. His mouth tipped. Says the man who drinks like he owes the beans money. Bold of you to assume I pay, I said. The barista reached our island of tension with the easy gait of someone who belonged to every table. Ina, her tag read. Short black hair, copper studs in one ear, an espresso stain where a sleeve met a wrist. Beta, by the scent, what little the room allowed through. She took us in with one glance, like a chess player glancing at the endgame. So, she said to me, deliberately loud. Is this the client you shaved for? Meyn didn't bother to hide his laugh. It was short, surprised, the kind that escapes before pride can strangle it. Excuse me? I said. Indignation mostly for show. Ina leaned on the table, conspiratorial. You came in 3 times this week, with your hood up and your jaw set like a cliff. Today, you have cheekbones. That means someone's in town. Meyn turned a page. He looks fine with or without cheekbones. Oh. He talks, Ina said, delighted. And compliments. I should charge extra for ambiance. Please do, I said. To his tab. She grinned, scribbled something, and glided away, leaving a wake of cinnamon sugar and mischief. He held the paper at a height that let me see the headline. Gray line announces internal review. Cute. I wondered if his name hid anywhere in the text. A ghost in the machinery. You're early, I said. For what? He asked. For pretending to be a coincidence. He folded the corner of a page down with surgical neatness. You're very sure the city bends itself around you. I'm sure you don't bend for anyone, I said, and then wondered if I'd put too much heat on the words. Silence, measured by rain. The room's filters hummed at a setting calibrated to polite society. Within their radius, the tick of hierarchy that usually pushes everyone into lanes softened. I'd learned to live in that softness, to become the thing that made it happen without tripping alarms. But, up close like this, the effect felt like a smudge across his precision. A fractional delay in his eye when he shifted focus, the smallest misfire in a predator's grace. He should have pressed. Alpha's press, that's the algorithm. Instead, he paused, like a metronome that had skipped a beat and decided to keep going anyway. You're not buying a filter, he said, nodding at the dispenser by the door. Not your style? I prefer my air honest, I said. Even when it lies. Ina returned with 2 coffees and a ramekin of sugar like a crown. She set 1 cup in front of him, 1 in front of me, and the sugar dead center as if officiating a ritual. Ground rules, she announced cheerfully. No breaking hearts on the premises, no blood in the sink, and if someone cries, I get to pick the playlist. I don't cry, Meyn said. Everyone cries, Ina said. It's just a question of hydration. She winked at me and retreated to the espresso machine, already pulling someone else's courage. I wrapped my hands around the cup. Heat climbed into my fingers like a living thing. The glass reflected us in overlapping planes. My hooded, not quite smile, his profile cut out. Of shadow, the rain making everything look like we were underwater, and decided it was fine. Let's make it interesting, I said. He didn't glance up. Define a rule, I said. First one to blink pays. Blink? The corner of his mouth twitched. That's a child's game, says the man with a newspaper, I said. He lifted his eyes then, and the room tilted a degree. Near up, they weren't just storm-colored, they had the clarity of pre-rain, the moment when the sky holds its breath. I met them with mine. Go, he said. So we stared. I let my face go slack, the way you do when you don't want to scare a skittish lock. He looked at me like he was measuring distances inside a blueprint only he could see. People moved behind the glass, cars performed for puddles, the espresso machine hissed like a cat. The filter's neutral tone brushed over the edges of things, humming in my bones. A muscle in his jaw ticked, then smoothed. He didn't have to perform dominance, it just hung off him, natural as a coat. But at this distance, it didn't settle on me the way it settled on others. My body refused the script, rewrote the beat. I could see him feel that refusal, the micro frown processed and dismissed as if it belonged to the weather. Thirsty? I asked softly, without moving my lips. No. Regretting the newspaper? Never. Something in my chest lifted. An irresponsible bird. He's playing. I just don't know why. The thought arrived fully dressed. It didn't help. We held. My eyes burned and watered, and argued with me about biology. I let the sting ride. He blinked. One clean, unavoidable shudder, then exhaled through his nose like a man conceding a hill he didn't wish to die on. I smiled, slow. I'll take that sugar crown as tribute. Congratulations, he said. You've bankrupted me. Keep the receipt, I said. Frame it. First loss. First recorded loss, he corrected. Important distinction. He slid his cup toward me by a finger's width, an offer encoded in the gesture. I stole a sugar cube and dropped it into my own coffee. It dissolved like a secret learning, to be honest. You really believe in rules, he said. I believe in writing them, I said. Otherwise, other people will. He folded the paper, squared it, set it down. For a heartbeat, with his hands empty, he looked younger, less sculpture, more man. A faint nick marked his thumb where a pen had once lived. My pocket remembered its twin, the weight of his pen riding my ribs like a decision. You left something, I said. In your office? He said, meaning his office, meaning the interrogation room. In your life, I said, because I never know when to shut up. He didn't flinch. If I did, I'll find it. Will you? I asked. Or will you wait for it to find you? Ina returned to drop the bill between us with the solemnity of a judge. House policy, she said. Whoever blinked buys. You were watching, he said, almost accusing, almost amused. I watch the rain, she said. And men who think it won't touch them. Meyn took the check. His fingers were steady, his eyes were not offended. Put it on. His tab, I said, on reflex. Mine, he finished, and the smallest smile cut across his face like a secret shortcut. He slid his card over and didn't look at me while he did it, which meant he knew I was looking. When Ina left, he took a breath, as if to say something else, and then didn't. The room's hum filled the space where his words might have gone. Outside, a bus pulled up and knelt. A woman in a red coat stepped off and spread her umbrella like a bright, improbable wing. You're not going to ask why I let you go, he said finally. I already know why, I lied. Do you? Because you wanted this coffee, I said lightly. He considered me like a lock whose tolerances he could learn if he was patient enough. I wanted you to run, he said. That's different from letting you go. Sounds like semantics. Sounds like truth. I swallowed coffee that had cooled to honest bitterness. The neutral filters hummed. Somewhere behind them, biology paced and pressed and waited to be useful. He didn't reach for it. I didn't either. The truce was fragile and tasted like burnt sugar. Ina returned his card and a receipt heavy with tip. See you tomorrow, she told both of us, as if we'd made an appointment and forgotten to write it down. Coincidence, I said, into the rim of my cup. Pattern, he said, standing. He lifted the newspaper, tapped it once against the table as if to settle its contents, and shrugged his coat back on. Rain clung to the glass like a promise. He looked down at me, close. The softness in his focus felt like a deliberate mercy. Or maybe it was me, smoothing the air without meaning to. Either way, his voice arrived lower. Next time, he said, pick a harder game. Next time, I said, bring a better pen. He left, the door kissing him out into weather. The cafe's warmth flowed back into the space he vacated, rapid, embarrassed. Ina slid into his chair without asking, chin in hand, eyes bright. So, she said, is he going to arrest you or buy you furniture? I watched the rain take his shape and make it stranger. My pulse had learned a new tempo and was trying it on. He's playing, I said, mostly to myself. I just don't know why. Ina followed my gaze, softened. Maybe it isn't about why, she said. Maybe it's about who blinks next. I set the empty cup down and felt the echo of a room with a metal table and a door that wasn't locked. The rules had been written. I could bend them later. Not me, I said, but my eyes burned, and the world outside the glass refused to stop looking like water. Meyn Calder lived like a man who kept a blade in every line of his life. His building wore money like it was bored by it. Matte black facade, concierge, with a face carved out of neutral, elevator that moved without admitting motion. The hall outside his place smelled like lemon oil and the memory of rain. No scuff marks, no neighborly shoes. The door itself, the door, was a lesson. Layered deadbolts, a smart core with anti-replay logic, a mechanical fallback so elegant it might as well have been jewelry. The kind of lock that wanted to be solved and resented you for it when you did. I let my fingers think. Tension bar, shallow pressure, listen for pins like tiny hearts. The electronic brain asked me who I was 4 different ways. I lied. 4 different ways, and made each lie sound like a different truth. The mechanical picked its pride up and stepped aside with a click that felt like a private victory. He'd left the chain on, old-fashioned. I smiled, slid a thin wedge through the gap, lifted until the chain sighed free. When a hunter leaves something as sentimental as a chain, he's telling you both, that he knows what the past can do, and that he thinks he's smarter than it. Maybe he is. Tonight, I wanted to find out how much of that was costume. Inside, clean lines, empty surfaces, glass that didn't believe in fingerprints. A narrow foyer opened into a room with a single long window taking up most. Of a wall, the city pressed close, all wet neon and slow traffic arteries. The apartment was minimally furnished. So minimal that each object felt like a word in a sentence where everything mattered. Slate sofa, low black table, a lamp that threw golden light like it had learned restraint. A kitchen visible at the far end, counters reflecting back their own perfection. On the left-hand wall, an island of chaos. A board. The only messy thing in the place, and even it was deliberate. Thread lines in burned orange and snow white, pinned through printouts and photos and scraps of handwriting that were not mistakes. Gray line at the center in fat letters, circled, radiating from it. Names I knew and wished I didn't. CEOs with immaculate reputations. Security chiefs whose smiles never reached their eyes. A research lab out in the industrial belt. A private hospital with windows that never opened. Arrows noted shipments of compliance aids, the euphemism so neat it made my teeth hurt. And there I was, not front and center, off to the right. A photo of me getting into a bus 3 neighborhoods over, hood up, profile a suggestion. Underneath, in neat small letters, he'd written, "Not target, key." I stared at that, until the city behind the glass went out of focus. Key. To what? A door I'd never wanted? A lock I'd built around myself? Something in me that had been trying very hard not to believe in flattery and doom both at once said, not a trap, not a trophy, a function. I left a fingerprint where it couldn't be helpfully wiped, the underside lip, of an end table, the spine of a book that had been moved once, and not again. I straightened a stack of magazines by a millimeter the wrong way. I breathed, just a little too much, onto the pane of the window, watching my fogged oval bloom and fade. I wanted him to know I'd been here. I wanted to see how carefully he pretended not to see. The bathroom door stood open like a question mark. I passed it. In the bedroom, the bed was precisely made, too crisply for sleep. A closet door was ajar. Suits in a grayscale gradient, shirts like empty intentions. A shoebox high on a shelf. The cardboard rubbed smooth at the edges, the way some people worry rosaries. I considered it, and decided not to. You don't open every box on the first break-in. This was reconnaissance, not desecration. Back in the main room, the board pulled at me again. A cluster of clippings near the bottom. Unregulated mark removals. Private clinics. Increased risk of hemorrhage, dissociation, death. A blurry photo of a surgical lamp. A diagram of the endocrine manipulations that made marks stick, like a parasite that had learned to write its own poetry. I could feel the threads, even without touching them, a web meant to catch something bigger than me. The elevator down the hall sighed and stilled. Footsteps. Slow, certain, no bag, keys already in hand. My pulse learned percussion and refused to forget. I positioned myself midway between the door and the window where the reflection would argue with the reality and neither one would confess. The lock turned. The door opened. He came in on a stripe of city light, shed the rain the way some men shed company, and set a small paper bag on the console table with the careful economy I was starting to recognize as a second language. He noticed the chain was unlatched. His left shoulder flexed, almost a shrug, almost a calculation being put aside. His gaze traveled the room and stopped on me like we had agreed to meet. The expression that crossed his face did not belong to a man surprised in his own home. It belonged to someone who had asked a question and received exactly the answer he knew he would. "You collect faces?" I said, nodding toward the board. "Or is your memory just bad?" He followed my nod, then returned his eyes to mine. Slow, clean. "I left the door open," he said. "I wanted to see when you'd come." The most irritating thing about him was that he sounded like truth when he said it. We stood exactly 2 arms' lengths apart. The window behind me turned us into versions of ourselves. Me, a silhouette with a heartbeat. Him, a figure set into the geometry of a room that fit him too well. Between us, the air hummed with the neutrality of good filters and the dishonesty of bodies. "Greyline," I said, tilting my head at the center of the board. "Ambitious hobby. It's my job to know where my employer is wrong," he said. "Most people just cash the checks. I am cashing the checks," he said mildly. "With interest." "I'm not a target," I said, tasting the words he'd written. "I'm a key." "You're a way in," he said, "and a way out." "For whom?" "For you," he said, and it would have been corny if he hadn't rapped it in that level voice. We stepped at the same time, a reflex loop neither of us had planned, close enough now that the careful blank pressure of alpha presence, his, should have been a wall. It wasn't. Up this close, my skin did what it has done since I was old enough to recognize the look in a gym teacher's eyes. It turned the volume down. The hierarchy static, flattened. The world's hand on the back of my neck lifted. A ripple crossed the window, small but visible, as if the rain had forgotten where the glass was and decided to touch the inside. I felt it under my skin like someone plucked a string only I could hear. He felt something too. I watched the micro-correction, a focus shift, a breath that left him a fraction lighter. Predators memorize the weight of rooms, he recalibrated without panic. Like a pilot telling the plane the sky had changed and that was all. We were close enough for the air to become personal. Up close, I could see the scar, a pale crescent around his left wrist, healed too neatly to be an accident. The kind of scar that says scalpel rather than staircase, old mark removal, not the safe kind. The kind done because the person under the knife wanted to decide for himself who he was after. I looked. He let me. I lifted my hand without touching. Someone tried to mark you? I asked. When I was young, and someone else's idea of useful, he said. I cut it out. Now. He angled his wrist, as if showing me the clean vein underneath. No masters. I should have made a joke greedy enough to ruin the moment. I didn't. The honesty of the admission balanced on its own blade. The apartment was not big enough for this quiet. You're careful, he said, as if this were a criticism and a compliment both. You left evidence at the level of an apology. I wanted you to have something to lecture me about, I said. I prefer conversations, he said. Is that what you're calling this? He glanced past my shoulder, a flash of attention at the window, at the ripple that had not learned to behave. Whatever you're doing, he said, not accusatory, simply noting, you do it even when you're not trying. I'm not doing anything, I said, which was technically true in the way that tides are technically water. Maybe your filters are out of calibration, maybe, he said, and didn't move away. We stood there, two men pretending we were made of patience. His eyes were the color of a promise he hadn't decided how to keep. My heart tapped out a pattern that made bad decisions sound like music. I didn't sell you out, he said, as if continuing a conversation we hadn't had yet. Good to know, I said, and meant it more than I wanted to. He gestured toward the paper bag by the door. I brought food. Is that what hunters are doing now? Baiting with takeout? If I were baiting you, he said, I'd have chosen better noodles. That sounds like an insult to the noodles. It's an insult to the notion that you can be baited. I laughed, short and real. Careful, I might start to like you. Careful, he said softly. You might admit you already do. There it was. A step too far and exactly right. The room shifted around us, the way a lock gives that last imperceptible yield when you've set every pin just so. My chest ached in that way that means you're alive and a little tired of it. I stepped back first. Not because I wanted to, because the game needed distance to stay a game. He let me. He didn't follow, didn't reclaim the space as territory. He watched me the way you watch someone balance on a ledge, not to catch them if they fall, but to know which way to move when they jump. I pointed at the board. You think you can take gray line down from a wall in your living room? I think walls are for seeing, he said. Taking down happens elsewhere. And I'm elsewhere. You're here, he said, not triumphantly, as if here were a thing we were co-inventing. Silence, stretched like glass. Neither of us broke it. I nodded at the door. You going to stop me? He shook his head once. Not tonight. Because you trust me? I asked, and felt stupid immediately. Because I prefer doors to cages, he said. And because you came in through the chain. I rolled my eyes, because the alternative was something truer. I'll leave the chain for you then. I crossed the room. At the threshold, I paused, looked back, and offered him his own line. You left the door open. I did, he said. I wanted to see when you'd come. And now that you've seen? He drew a breath, let it out. Now I see how you leave. I relatched the chain from the inside, a courtesy, a signature, and slipped out. The hall smelled like lemon and the idea of rain again. The elevator took me down with monastic silence. In the mirrored panels, I watched the ghost of myself not look away. On the street, the night felt warmer than it should have. My pocket held the memory of his pen like a talisman. The city threw our reflections back at us in every window in one of them. Behind me, I swore I saw a ripple cross a pane that wasn't there. Hunter, hunted, door, key. I walked until the rain remembered how to fall straight. He had food. He had a wall. He had a scar that said, "No one got to keep him." He had let me go without making it a lesson. The dynamic had tipped, and I knew it. He was being watched now, and I was the one doing it. Somewhere behind the glass of my ribs, something turned, clicked, and did not lock. The message came as a tremor through my life, not a knock. A silent notification pulsed in the corner of my screen, a breadcrumb with my legal beta name spelled correctly, which meant whoever sent it had done their homework. Move now. They're outside your door. No return address, no signature, just the taste of copper in my mouth and the awareness that the building's hum had changed key. I killed the lamp. The apartment folded into the blue of neon streetlight. My window reflected my face back at me. Hood up, jaw set, the version of me Ina teased me for, feet on the stairs. Not my neighbors. Too coordinated. The electric pulse of the hallway sensors tripped and reset. I didn't take time to think about Meyn's board, his clean wrist, the way the window had rippled when we stood too close. Thinking lives in the second after the door breaks. I grabbed the canvas roll of pics, the flash drive in the plant pot, the cash envelope from under the sink. The wall safe clicked open and accepted my panic like it had been designed for it. A soft knock, then the polite voice of the building manager's intercom. "Mr. Hart? We've had a water leak reported. May we—" I threw the deadbolt and went for the fire escape. The kitchen window was old glass, wavy enough to remember other summers. I slid it up, slipped through, and let the rain take my hair with a cold hand. The alley below glowed an ugly aquarium green. Somewhere, a siren made up its mind. Above me, the roofline knitted a dark seam against a low sky. The men at my door didn't bother to keep up the leak pretense long. The first kick rattled the frame, the second made the glass rattle in a sympathetic panic. 2 floors up, a neighbor's baby started crying. I went up, not down, always counterintuitive when you want to vanish. Hands slick on the rusted ladder, boots kissing rungs, breath counting the distances my body could still learn. My apartment door gave with a sound I felt in my teeth. I froze, listening. 3 pairs of feet. One voice pitched to calm. Clear the windows. Check the vents. They moved like training videos. I reached the roof and stepped into weather so full it felt medieval. The city spread glass and hunger in every direction, lights fuzzed by rain. The nearest billboard sold a filter called Mute to couples who wanted to fight fair. I laughed without humor, down in my chest where it wouldn't go anywhere useful. The roof access door banged open. A flashlight probed the dark. "North side," a man said into his mic. "He's up." I ran. Gravel slid treacherous under my soles, the edges biting like a warning. A low parapet, a jump to the next building, 2 feet between, 3 floors of air under that, and the wet making everything honest. I counted 1, 2, and leapt. For a second, gravity considered its options. I hit the opposite lip hard enough to bruise bone and clawed up like a feral thought. A hand closed on my jacket hem and missed. A curse went sonic in the rain. Liam Hart. The calm voice called across the weather. "You're making this difficult." I didn't turn. If you turn, your body does the rest. I bolted for the stair hut on the next roof and slipped around its blind side. A figure came at me from the other direction, too close. My hand shot out on reflex, palm to his chest to shove, and the air between us buckled. It happens sometimes when stress chooses me instead of the other way around, the hierarchy. Lines inside a radius of me go fuzzy, like a radio dropping out of a tunnel. Up close, the alpha edge in a body goes to static. The muscle that says press loses the count. You can watch it in their eyes, the fraction of a beat where they look for the script and can't find it. He faltered. It was only a step, but it was enough. I slid past him, my shoulder brushing the fabric under his rain shell, the scent neutralizer patch on his clavicle giving a sour little sigh. His focus tried to snap back and landed on nothing. He blinked, once, twice, as if annoyed at a gnat. By then, I was gone. Down a service stair, through a door meant for maintenance ghosts, into a maze of catwalks strung over an atrium that thought it was a greenhouse. Rain hammered glass a meter over my head, drumming my name into the architecture. The men fanned out behind me, the calm stitching them into a single creature with 4 legs and 1 mind. The calm voice again, secure the south exit. He'll go for the street. I tried north. Neon unstitched itself in the puddles below, as if it wanted to be veins. A motion sensor clicked and blinked and forgot me. I got as far as the last bend before another light found me, slicing me into clarity. Don't, a man said, gun leveled but not steady. We only need to talk. Talk to your chain of command, I said, and heard the edge in my own voice like someone else's knife. He took a step, fighting the drag of whatever my body was doing to the air. The gun's muzzle dipped a subtle centimeter. I raised both hands, not because I was surrendering, but because balance has its own physics. The gene in me, the one that makes rooms forget their place, flared again, a hot white ribbon along my spine. Within a meter, too, their certainty sloughed. The calm voice said, "Sharper. Focus, Nelson." And the man's jaw clenched like obedience was a muscle that could be bench-pressed. Another door. Another slice of rain. I broke out into an alley that smelled like old oil and the brothers of old oil. Neon made a halo out of the steam coming off a vent. I ran until the city turned me into noise. By the time my lungs had stopped trying to become mouths, I was 3 blocks away. Under a theater awning pasted with the faces of people who could afford sorrow. I bent double and let the storm bead my neck. The shakes hit, fast and mean. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, an old emergency vibration I hadn't used in years. A number I didn't know. I answered, because stupidity and curiosity wear the same coat. Talk fast. Silence, then. You need to move again. Not Meyn, a woman, measured, low. This channel burns in 30 seconds. Are you? Someone who prefers doors to cages, she said dryly. And I wanted to hate her for it. They won't hold perimeter long. They're not police. Who are they? Ask your hunter, she said, and the line died like a trick candle. Rage punched a hole in whatever careful organ I'd been cultivating in my chest. The math was indecently simple. Someone tipped them. Someone who reads my name correctly. Someone who says doors, like a code word. Every arrow pointed at Meyn, and his neat pen and his wall with my face labeled key. I found a ladder and climbed until the city had fewer opinions. The roof was unromantic concrete, slick, and nobly ugly. The rain had downgraded from knife to thread, which meant I could hear the part of me that had started to trust him and wanted to make a case for nuance. I stepped on that voice gently. It didn't stop talking. It just went muffled. He came into view across the roofline as if the night had been waiting to put him there. No backup. Just a man in a dark coat absorbing water and not caring. You, I said, not shouting. The rain-carried sound fine. You had a key to my door. I had a warrant, he said. Briefly. Funny, I said. The men who tried to collect me didn't smell like paperwork. He didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He let the water stripe his face until he looked carved out of it. I thought you were just a hunter, I said, and sheathed the hurt inside anger so I could touch it. Turns out, you're a coward. The word hit the air between us like a dropped wrench. He stood there and took it. You're wrong, he said. I'm just tired of chasing people who don't know what they want. He didn't defend himself. He didn't list charges or names. He didn't step toward me or away, which left me the only person moving. I hated him for that. I hated him for the way my own body tried to smooth the atmosphere even now, even with my heart doing drum solos. The window of the building beside us showed our smudged twin selves, and the reflection rippled like a breath against glass. I know what I want, I said. I want my life. Good, he said. Steady. Act like it. The gene flared one more time, a hard, bright bloom that made the rain tremble in my peripheral vision. If anyone had tried to come through the roof access, they would have lost their footing on nothing. Meyn's gaze slid for the smallest human fraction, then locked again, not on me, but on whatever future he was parsing. I turned away first. Rage only burns clean for so long before it starts to smoke. Stay out of my walls, I said. I can't, he said. Your walls are my job. I left him to the rain. He didn't follow. Of course he didn't. Back at my apartment, the door hung skewed in its frame, arthritic. They'd gone through my drawers and stopped at the sheets, always the sheets, as if people hid themselves in fabric. I did the only useful thing left. I erased myself. I scrubbed every surface I had loved for its usefulness, peeled the SIM and snapped it shut, down the home server and watched its little light fade like a star with too much patience. I stood in the bathroom and let hot water run until the mirror fogged and the last of the adrenaline shook out of my hands and into the drain. With my fingertip, I drew letters through the steam, then traced over them with a permanent marker so they'd stay when the heat died. If you want to catch me, find the truth. In the main room, I left the news on low to keep the silence from getting ideas. A cheery anchor's voice tried to be respectful. Greyline Corporate has announced a further expansion of their internal review following allegations tied to disappearances, connected to private clinics. The clip cut to stock footage of a smiling executive standing near a wall of tasteful moss. I killed the sound. The city roared in its place. Under my ribs, the organ I'd stepped on earlier raised its hand and asked to be heard. I told it no. When someone opens a cage, it's not about freedom. When someone points a net at you, it's not about capture. It's about what you believe when you're staring at the rain and a man doesn't come closer. Pain sat with me like an old friend with bad advice. Distrust pulled up a chair. The room felt larger without the door working right, all that broken frame inviting weather. I zipped my bag. I took one last look at the mirror and the ink that wouldn't wash. Then I turned out the lights and left the cage open behind me because, if there was going to be a truth, it wasn't going to live here. Tessa's apartment still smelled like the old days, solder, rain, and cinnamon gum pretending to be toothpaste. She opened the door with one hip, a screwdriver between her fingers like a cigarette. Her hair was a dark braid over one shoulder. Her grin was a blade. You still think people chase you for money? She said by way of hello. Sometimes, it's for principle. I've never been a principal, I said, stepping past her into the organized chaos. More like an anecdote. Keep lying to yourself, she said cheerfully. It's cute. Her place had always been a machine that happened to have walls, dissected drones on the kitchen table, a potted fern that refused to die on top of a server rack, a framed photo of a younger us in thrift store leather jackets, the kind that kept secrets badly. She handed me a towel. I remembered I was dripping. You heard? I asked. She nodded toward the muted newsfeed on a wall display. The chirpy anchor's mouth moved around Greyline and internal review like rubber words. I heard the street, she said. It talked too loud. Sit. I sat. The towel scratched my neck and then softened as it warmed. I got a gift, I said. Anonymous. Move now. They were right. Yeah, she said. rummaging through a drawer for a cable that only existed in legend. "You're welcome." I blinked. "That was you?" "Don't get sentimental," she said, finding the cable and looking offended that it had made her work. "It wasn't a rescue. It was a variable. Tessa." She flicked her eyes to mine. "Look at me. Your leak? The one that almost got you gift-wrapped? It was bait. We needed to flush the mole at Gray Line." Victor Hahn. I tasted the name like a bruise. I knew it from Meyn's wall. I knew it from the way corporate men shook hands like ownership. "You sent them to my door," I said, "because facts feel calmer when you say them out loud." "I sent them to a door where you wouldn't be when they arrived," she countered. "And our mutual friend made sure the wrong hallway looked right. Our mutual friend." I didn't have to say the name. Tessa took pity anyway. "Meyn Calder is not your traitor, Liam. He's cover. He's the only reason you didn't end up in a clinic with a tasteful moss wall." Shame is a quiet thing, and a loud one. It burned the back of my throat, while relief cooled my lungs. "I called him a coward," I said. "Good," she said. "Keeps his ego from forming a union." The apartment door clicked again, and Ina shouldered her way in with a paper bag and the authority of someone who knows where your mugs live. "I brought courage," she announced, and held up 3 ceramic cups. "It's decaf, don't panic." "You brought decaf into my home," Tessa said. "This is an act of war." "I need your hands steady," Ina said, dropping the bag on the counter and prying out a container of noodles. "Also, if we're going to livestream anything, I want my eyeliner to stay where I put it." "Livestream," I said, "because sometimes the future arrives already assembled." Tessa perched on the arm of a chair, foot bouncing. "Public arrest," she said. Big, loud. The kind of theater that makes executives sweat through their wolf-gray suits. "Absolutely not," I said on reflex. "I don't do public. Crowds are for people who don't owe favors to stairwells." "That's why you won't actually be under control," she said. "It will look like it. You'll be wearing very fashionable bracelets, and Meyn will say very authoritative words, and, meanwhile, Ina will convince Greyline's internal network that transparency is the new black." Ina saluted me with a noodle. "I've been practicing my customer service voice," she said. "It's terrifying." I put the towel down and pressed my palm flat to my thigh to stop the shake. The room was small enough that all our energies brushed. The hierarchy lines, those invisible rails other people ride without thinking, wanted to tangle us. I felt my genes stir, the instinct to smooth the air like a hand ironing a shirt you intend to wear into trouble. "Not yet," I told my body. "Later." "Victor will come to interrupt the show," Tessa went on. "He can't resist a fire he didn't set. He'll try to shut it down. He'll leave fingerprints all over the override. We capture those, and we stream the rest. The clinics, the mark removals, the money. If we pull it off, Greyline eats itself." I looked at Ina. "And you're in because—" She smudged a thumb across the counter, leaving a little heart in flour dust. "Because the city is meaner than it needs to be," she said. "And because you two are awful at picking snacks." Tessa tossed me a slim case. Inside, a cuff that looked like jewelry and lied in 3 different frequencies. "Prop," she said. "Locks on camera. Unlocks by thinking you're better than it." "I am," I said, and then heard how that sounded and winced. Ina said, already in character. We moved to the bar because plans are always better with witnesses and wood. White noise was half full, the kind of safe in-between a city needs. The filters hummed just enough to cut the edges off arguments. Condensation ran down glass, making lights softer than they deserved. In the back booth, Tessa spread schematics like tarot. The mall atrium's sightlines, security, routines, the choke points, where one man can look like many if he moves correctly. Meyn arrived without being the last or the first to step through the door. He found us the way a needle finds the seam. "Evening," he said, like we were about to debate dessert. My body tried to do 10 things at once. Instead, I concentrated on the simplest. Breathe. The air between us wanted to make choices about who got to speak first. I felt my gene uncoil, that low subharmonic in the blood. I thought of a level, not a dominance, not a plea, just a line drawn where we could all stand without slipping. The room eased. It's subtle when it works. Ina blinked. Tessa's foot stopped bouncing. Meyn's focus didn't stumble this time. It adjusted, like he'd stepped onto a moving walkway and found the pace. "You two look conspiratorial," he said, and took the seat beside me. Without asking, as if asking would have been the unkindest move. "Tell him," Tessa said, chin to chest, challenging and fond. Meyn folded his hands. His wrists were bare. The pale crescent scar caught the bar light. "Victor Hahn," he said. "He's the one who signs requisitions for ghosts. He leaks for profit. He silences to keep the profit quiet." "And my door?" I asked, quietly. He didn't look away. "I filed a warrant to keep internal from filing something worse," he said. "I withdrew it the second they turned their backs. I sent Tessa the floor plan. I stood in the rain because I couldn't erase what you'd think when you saw the mess." Shame and relief did their duet again. "I let them. I called you a coward," I said. "You were wet," he said. "You get a pass." Tessa made an exaggerated gagging sound. "So now we're not a pair of criminals," she announced. "We're a duo of moralists." Ina raised her cup. "To ethical felonies." Meyn cleared his throat. "We staged the arrest," he said. "In a place with cameras and too many exits. I put hands on you, you pretend to be caught. I say things Victor cannot stomach. He breaks cover to stop me. Ina opens the archive floodgates. Tessa tags his override and rides it back to his accounts. We walk you out while everyone argues over who's in charge. "I'm not a prop," I said before I could decide to be nicer. "You're not," he said. "You're the axis." "And you?" I asked. He looked at his own hands, as if to confirm they belonged to him. "I'm not playing a hunter," he said. "I'm playing the one who lets go." The words landed in me like a key finding a tumbler's sigh. Too much, too plain. Except it wasn't. It fit the shape of the space we'd been building every time he didn't close a door. "Okay," I said, and felt something unclench behind my lungs. "One condition." He lifted an eyebrow. "We write the rules," I said. "All of us. No surprise footnotes." "Agreed," he said immediately. "Rule 1. If you want out, say out." "Rule 2, Tessa said, grinning. "No dying." "Rule 3, Ina added. "If anyone cries, I pick the playlist." We huddled over the plan, our shoulders making a tense, stupid little tent. I ran the cuffs through my fingers until the muscle memory set. I practiced breathing the room flat and then letting it rise again, like tide work. Up close, it felt like controlling a wince. Small, precise, invisible unless you knew me. Meyn watched me once too long, and then pretended he hadn't. The moment yawned toward something unwise. "Don't," I said softly. "I'm not doing anything," he said, just as softly. "You're being honest," I said. "It's rude." He huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh, and might have been surrender. "Noted." The phone on the table buzzed, a single mean sound. Tessa checked it, and everything in her face aligned into the line we used to follow without talking. "It's time," she said. "Mall security shift changes in 20 minutes. Victor's calendar just sprouted a gap. We stood. Ina slung a messenger bag like a weapon. Tessa tucked the screwdriver behind her ear like a comb. Meyn adjusted his coat. I pocketed the cuffs and the version of myself that could pass for tame. As we reached the door, Meyn's hand hovered near my elbow and didn't land. "Liam." "Later," I said, but not like an exit. Like a promise we might eventually keep. Outside, the rain had paused to listen. The city lights breathed. For a moment, the air went level on its own. Or because I asked it to. We stepped into the night as if it had been waiting for us to finally agree on the rules. The mall had been designed by someone who loved reflections more than people. 3 tiers of glass balconies stared at themselves across a yawning atrium. Light pouring in from a skylight big enough to teach a storm manners. Holographic panels roofed the walkways like tame constellations, ads blooming and collapsing. In soft color, filters for dates, filters for interviews, filters for you. A fountain pretended to be a river at the center. All choreography and no memory. I walked out into it on purpose. The cuffs lay cool and heavy in my pocket, a prop with ideas. The plan had the neatness of a math problem. Appear where a man like me shouldn't, drift into a camera's periphery, and let a hunter with a scar and good posture make the kind of scene executives hate. Ina was already threaded into the mall's nervous system, her code in the bones of the network. Tessa rode the security feeds like a tide. Meyn would come from the East Concourse at a pace that read professional and not personal. Victor Hahn would swallow his own tongue trying to stop us. It only works if you believe the theater while you're in it. I practiced my face on the way in, alert, not hunted, interested, not hiding. The filters in the air hummed along the edges of biology, smoothing strangers into politeness. It was almost comfortable, the way a lie can be if you sit very still. I let myself be seen. The first camera found me the way a shy cat decides your lap is inevitable. I turned enough that the lens got profile, hood down, jaw set softer than usual, hands visible, the kind of man who still could be anyone if you didn't look too hard. The hollow panels over the cosmetics shop flickered, a live ticker in. The corner of a news screen shifted topics with an over-eager hiccup. "Copy," Ina said in my ear, voice compressed to a whisper none of the mall's microphones could catch. 3 feeds on you. Calder in 30 seconds. Tessa's in their badge system wearing a halo. "Make it a good one," I said. "I want to look sanctified." "You want to look unarmed," Tessa put in. "Sanctity is a poor defense." "Speak for your gods," I said. "Boys," Ina sighed. "Focus." "Liam, pivot left." "There. That camera's got the atrium and the east entrance." I walked toward the fountain. Kids in matching raincoats leaned over the edge, their chaperone lecturing gravity. A man in a suit argued gently with a woman holding a bag that announced a brand I couldn't afford. The world had the specific normalcy that makes disruption feel personal. The east entrance breathed. Meyn Calder arrived with the weather. He didn't rush. He didn't signal. He just walked into frame and became the solution the scene had been waiting for. "Liam Hart," he said, voice pitched to carry. Heads turned like flowers convincing themselves the sun had moved. His badge blinked on, gray lines avalanche of a logo looking temporary on his lapel. "You're under arrest." We had rehearsed the next 15 seconds with the kind of rigor normally reserved for dance and crime. I went very still. He crossed the last steps at a hunter's speed with a partner's hands. Palms around my wrists. Fingers precise. Warm. The prop cuffs lifted from my pocket with a sleight of hand that was not slight so much as consent. He clicked them closed and leaned in the exact fraction the cameras liked best. "Don't panic," he murmured. "I'm going to let go properly." My body, treacherous and trained, wanted to level the air. I told it not to. I let the hierarchy pressure land the way gravity should in a public trap. Honest, expected, survivable. It made me sway an inch toward him, which the cameras read as struggle and my chest read as, "Oh." "On the record," he said sharply to the nearest phone someone hadn't meant to be recording until now. "Subject is wanted in connection with unlawful entry and data tampering." Ina's voice. And go. The mall's screens hiccuped again, a stutter that looked like a software update. Every hollow panel in range blinked out, blinked in, and stopped being ads. Greyline's logo filled them, then dissolved into a split screen I knew too well. Internal memos, clinic invoices, emails where executives wrote about people as if they were budget dust. Victor Hahn's signature underneath a requisition for compliance assists. Our conversation in the cafe, caught on the coffee shop's camera and turned into a parable about consent and rules, stitched itself between the documents like commentary. Shouts started 5 places at once. The chaperone put her arms out like a guardrail. The suited man said a word I couldn't hear and meant it. Security in mall black earpieces put their hands to their ears in a choreography no one teaches civilians. Rap it, Meyn said under his breath. They'll go for the breaker room. I'm already there, Tessa said, fingers audible on keys even across a city's worth of cable. Victor's coming hot from the north lot. He looks angry in wolf gray. Of course he does, Ina said. Liam, smile pretty. You're trending. 2 security officers approached with the careful posture of people trying to be brave in daylight. Sir, the taller one said to Meyn, eyes glued to the badge. We need you to coordinate with Greyline, Meyn said, crisp enough to press a shirt. I am Greyline. This arrest is part of an internal probe. The officer's gaze snagged on the screen's unfurling, ill-advised transparency. Should we? Yes, Meyn said, and the man allowed himself to be relieved. Cameras multiplied like rabbits. Phones lifted, the American reflex to the scent of spectacle. I stood with my wrists dressed up as inevitable and tried not to think about the way his breath warmed the edge of my jaw when he leaned in for the microphones. Mr. Hart, he said, louder now, as if this were the first time we'd met. You have the right to... You mean the right to remain interesting? I said, because theater is nothing without heckling. A laugh moved through the crowd, small, grateful, dangerous. Across the atrium, a new figure arrived and gathered attention the way a low voice gathers a room. Victor Hahn had the sort of face that executives buy from tailors. Sharp, expensive, convinced. He radiated control even with the mall's screens eating his secrets. His gaze found us with the speed of money. Agent Calder, he said, voice booming with the kind of authority that hates microphones. Stand down. This is not sanctioned. Meyn didn't turn his head. Internal review has been expanded, he said evenly, eyes on the nearest camera. Transparency, Directive 7.2. That directive doesn't exist, Victor snapped. His composure slipped in a way you could measure in decibels. Shut this off. Shut it all off. On it, someone in security said into their sleeve. The poor man believing his place in the story mattered to the ending. Hi, Victor, Ina said into our ears like a toast. Say, cheese. The screens obliged, flipping to a folder labeled with a neat timestamp and Han overrides. His credentials opened a door, and Tessa rode through it like the ocean rides moonlight. Files unspooled, account transfers, clinic logs, signed NDAs that looked like weapons on paper. Victor lost 20 IQ points in 3 seconds. Who authorized this? Parked. Who? He saw me then, really saw me, cuffed and calm and smiling like a man held by choice. Rage boiled past his filters. He started toward us. Security hesitated. The mall did not. The collective human attention turned us into a stage, and Victor into an actor who hadn't learned his lines. I said, stand down, he repeated, too loud. Meyn angled his body, putting himself between Victor and the camera, which looked like shielding and was. Any attempt to interrupt a transparency directive is grounds for heroics, I finished softly, just for him. We moved then because you have to. 2 other suits from Greyline flanked Victor, jamming comms with their own dirty frequencies. The fountain's lights, confused about who they served, cycled from river blue to ambulance red. The mall's emergency system hiccuped, and all the doors to the breaker rooms took a vote and decided to stay open. Tessa whooped in my ear. Got him. He's overriding the override. Following it upstream. Ina, hold the mirrors, I'm on it, Ina said, somewhere inside a rack of servers that had once, dreamily, believed they were air-conditioned forever. "Move," Meyn said to me low, and shoved, just enough to make it red. We staggered 3 steps left together, our bodies failing to disagree. Victor grabbed for my shoulder. Meyn's hand caught his wrist with the kind of confidence that can be mistaken for arrogance if you squint. Security tried to insert themselves into the history book and found that the page was already full. "Agent Calder," Victor hissed. "You're finished." "If so," Meyn said, "conversational. It will be after this." "Cut the power," Victor snapped. "For once," Tessa said sweetly, "we agree." The mall went dark, like a curtain falling. Even the emergency lights waited a beat, as if stunned by the audacity. The skylight admitted only the weather's opinion. People gasped. A single breath sucked into one shared lung. The fountain forgot its choreography and decided to be water again. In the hush, the hum of the filters stuttered and paused. My body understood darkness, the way some people understand prayers. I could feel him at my side even without the light. The orientation of shoulder, the angle of breath. The gene in me, my equalizer, my leveling, reached to smooth the air but found there was nothing to smooth. Between us, for that long beat, there wasn't a hierarchy to press down or lift up. We occupied the same line. "Liam," he said in the dark, a word without audience. "What now, Hunter?" I asked, because if I didn't lace it with humor, the moment would take me whole. "Now," he said, and his hand found mine where the cuff chain hung. "A date. No bracelets. Consent is a door." I opened it. The power came back with the sheepishness of a system that knows it will pretend this never happened. The screens rebooted to a chorus of, "Please wait." The fountain remembered its cues. People existed again. Meyn had the key for the cuffs. It was my key, because I'd built the lock and he'd memorized my tells. He turned the mechanism with a motion so small it could have been breath. The bracelets opened on a sigh and dropped into his palm, heavier off my skin than on it. Cameras found us and had opinions. Shouted something legal. Security discovered they had knees. "On the record," Meyn said loudly, tilting his head toward the nearest lens. "This arrest is suspended pending review." "You're going to prison," Victor said, color not suiting him. "Both of you." "Get in line," I said pleasantly. Ina laughed somewhere half a building away. "We have everything," she sang. "Tessa, you magnificent gremlin." "Say it again," Tessa said. "Mostly to the code." "Everything," Ina repeated. "Reverent. Clinics, money, the moss wall. It's Christmas and Ethics Day." "Walk," Meyn whispered. We walked. Not fast, not sneaking. Just 2 men leaving a stage that had finished with them. People made room. A child clapped once, because children sometimes understand timing. My wrists felt strangely light, like I'd put down a bag I hadn't admitted I was carrying. Victor followed, and then didn't. Forced into stillness by a dozen phones and his own reflection in the atrium's glass. The man yelling at transparency. Outside, the mall's automatic doors yawned to admit the weather, and then regretted it. The evening had the washed look the city gets when it decides to be kind for an hour. We stopped under an awning that was inadequate for both rain and this. He didn't touch me. Even now. He waited like a man who understood that victory was not a license. "Calder," I said, "because names are an upgrade from nicknames in the chest." "Liam," he said back, with a gravity that made it sound new. Humor tried to save me one last time. "You're not going to arrest me." "I'm not," he said. "You're not going to run either," I said. "I'm tired of running," he said. "And of chasing." "Then what?" "Then I keep the door open," he said simply. "And I let you choose." He was close enough that the rain from the awning's edge spattered his shoulder. Close enough that if I leaned, I did. The kiss wasn't cinematic. The angle was wrong, and the city was loud, and I forgot how to breathe for a second on purpose. It tasted like relief and metal and a lie retired with honors. It was not possession. It wasn't even promise. It was, finally, agreement. When I stepped back, the world made a sound like weather resuming. Okay, I said, smiling because the alternative was worship. One rule. He waited. If I blink, I said, you pay. He huffed, the ghost of a laugh. Happily, we walked toward the street, where Tessa's stolen car would pretend to be ours. Ina texted a skull and a heart. Behind us, the mall screens woke into a new kind of mourning. Inside me, the equalizer went quiet, not because it had been turned off, but because it had nowhere left to work. Between us, the air had found its level. Morning found my street first, and then, patiently, found me. The sun poured itself across the front window of the workshop, turning dust into glitter, and the brass on my workbench into small, stubborn stars. Outside, the city did its quiet impression, delivery vans performing slow, ballets, dog walkers apologizing to trees, a cyclist arguing with gravity. Inside, the air smelled like metal filings, oil with a citrus bite, and the coffee Ina insisted on delivering in unbranded brown bags because mystique keeps margins alive. Months had taught the room my name. The bench had a groove where my left elbow liked to sit. The vise closed with a click that sounded like welcome back. The small bell over the door tried different moods depending on who came in. It had a crush on Ina and a vendetta against couriers. Greyline was gone in the way big things go. First the headlines, then the wind-down notices, then the building with the moss wall, quietly becoming someone else's problem. Victor Hahn had smiled for his mugshot, as if a camera could be negotiated with. The smile did not go to trial with him. What remained were a few courageous whistleblowers, a handful of executives reinventing themselves, in other suits, and the soft, collective exhale of a city that had learned a new word for enough. Ina's cafe lab, White Noise, had moved 2 blocks closer to me because she said proximity increases intervention. She wore a white coat over band t-shirts and piped syrups as if they were data. Her menu included an Americano called The Alibi and a decaf called Don't Make a Face. Business was indecent. She called it redemption. Tessa had sent a postcard from a train somewhere colder than here. Fix things when you're angry. Forgive things when your hands stop shaking. On the back, a doodle of a screwdriver wearing a crown. No return address, which was a kind of affection. I worked. The lock on my bench was older than most people's regrets. Cast iron faceplate. Brass core, tarnished into green, where sweat had made a home. I'd been listening to its language for half an hour. Old locks have accents. This one lisped on its 3rd pin and loved to be humored. Don't be dramatic, I told it, and eased the pick a whisper to the left. The pin consented to being itself. The core turned a quarter shy of done and sulked. I paused, sipped coffee, and let the metal tell me where it had spent the last 50 years. A door that closed too hard, a winter that was mean, a child who pretended it was treasure. Same, I said, and the last pin lifted like it had decided to be brave. The cylinder rolled to open with the small, round happiness of a thing finally in conversation with itself. I breathed out, slow. There are victories so small, they feel like mercy. The bell chimed. It wasn't Ina's chiming, a flirty trill, nor a courier's impatient clatter. This was a single note that hung on the air as if testing the acoustics. Meyn stood in the doorway, silhouette cut out of sun. He wore a shirt the color of new rain and a coat that remembered weather. Around his neck, on a black cord, hung a key, old brass, bow worn smooth, teeth honest. You said, he began, stepping inside, a good key should fit more than one door. I said, I corrected, wiping my hands on a rag that looked worse than it was, a good key fits the door that deserves it. I angled my chin at the key. Field test? His mouth gave me the almost smile he used when he was trying not to startle something. Thought you'd never ask. He held the key up. In the morning light, it looked like a small son with responsibilities. He pushed the door mostly closed and slid the key into the inside lock. Old brass met a modern cylinder, which should have been a mismatch, but the key was a clever liar and my lock respected ambition. He turned. The bolt retracted with a sound like leather sighing. "It listens to you," he said. "Only because I stopped arguing with it," I said. "Try from the other side." He stepped back onto the sidewalk. A pedestrian with a paper bag full of oranges glanced at him and then at me with a neighbor. It's polite curiosity. Ah. The tall one who sometimes laughs when he thinks no one's watching. Meyn turned the key from out there. The lock yielded again, easy, and he shouldered the door open against a mild protest from the bell. "As advertised," he said, crossing the threshold. "Both sides open." "That's the point," I said. "Otherwise it's not a door. It's a promise with fine print." He paused a beat, listening. To the room, to me, to something the floorboards might have remembered. Then he closed the door with a hand on the old brass handle and didn't lock it. We stood in the light, like people auditioning for morning. "How's it feel?" I asked, not wearing a corporation. "Lighter," he said. "Also more expensive." "Freedom will do that," I said. "It makes you pay retail." He touched the key, where it rested against his sternum. The cord cut a clean line down the front of his shirt, black against rain. "I keep thinking," he said, "that I should miss the noise. The calms, the constant alertness." "You don't," I said. He tilted his head. "I don't." We looked at each other until looking felt less like a test and more like a place you could live. Up close, the scar on his wrist had settled into the geography of him, no longer an announcement, just a landmark. My poor equalizer gene, which used to perk up like a streetlight at dusk whenever we shared air, dozed in the corner contentedly. Between us, there was nothing to level, the line held by itself. "Coffee?" I asked, because pretending you're civilized is often the same as being so. "I brought my own failure," he said, lifting a takeout cup with an unlabeled lid. "Don't judge me." I took it, sniffed, winced. "Is an act of aggression. Habit," he said, unabashed. "We can break those," I said, reaching under the counter for mugs that had learned our mouths. "Hold still. I'm about to improve your life." While the kettle sang a small opera, he wandered the workshop with the careful hands of a man who respects other people's altars. He touched nothing and noticed everything. The framed photograph of a lock museum I would never admit I'd cried in. The nasty little skeleton key I wore when I wasn't sure who I was. The note from Ina taped to the back door. "Stop using my cafe as your supply closet. Love. Management." "You're happy," he said finally, not surprised, just noting. "I'm quieter," I said. "Happiness is noisy, I think. This is..." I searched for it and found the word in the way the light didn't argue with the room. "Level. Balance," he said. "I'll take it." We took our coffee to the stool and the beat-up chair that had become his by behavior, if not by law. He sat. I poured. Steam rose, and then decided to belong here. The first sip was hot enough to make the future seem plausible. He nodded toward the lock on my bench. "How's the patient?" "Difficult," I said. "Fond. Third pin. Thinks it's the protagonist." "Relatable," he said. I set my mug down and leaned my hip against the bench so my knee touched his thigh in the way knees know before people do. He didn't move away. The room did not shift to accommodate hierarchy. It had no reason to. He lifted the key on its cord again, thumb finding the smoothest place on the bow. "You were right," he said, "about doors." "I like being right," I said. "I've noticed," he said, and the corner of his mouth warmed. "Check me." I stood, stepped around behind him, and reached for the cord knot at the back of his neck. My fingers brushed the soft hair there, and a memory I hadn't given permission. To return, rain, a mall gone dark, the taste of relief fashioned into a kiss. He angled his head so I could work the knot loose, not performative, just trust. Given the way you hand a tool to someone whose grip you know. I slipped the key free and waited. You sure? I brought it to see what you do, he said. Whatever that is, yes. I didn't engrave a name. I didn't mark a claim. I took a length of red thread from the jar where I keep reminders and tied it through the bow. Not neat, ends short. It was nothing and everything, color and function, attention made into object. Now? He asked. Now it's harder to lose, I said, and looped it back over his head. The key settled against his chest. Small warmth through cotton. And easier to find. We let the quiet be alive for a while. He tapped his cup with his nail. You're going to have to keep me honest about coffee. I sipped mine and pretended to consider. You're beyond help. Harsh. Effective. He raised his eyebrow. You going to make me a better person, Hart? No, I said, and put a hand over the key where it rested. Just one who drinks better coffee. He held still, like a man deciding not to run because running would ruin the view. I picked up his cup, took a pageant of a sip, and made a face so dire the bell over the door snorted. He laughed, small, real, unweaponized. You're impossible, he said. You're welcome, I said. He leaned, not quite asking, and not quite assuming. I met him halfway, the way you do when you've built a door and decided what it's for. The kiss was morning, gentle, practical, a promise you can revisit, and an invitation you don't need a suit for. When we parted, the room stayed level. Pointed at my mug. Convert me. I swapped cups, handed him mine. He tasted, paused, and then, finally, smiled like a man who has been wrong and lived. Noted, he said. Again, I warned. Habit is expensive. I'll pay, he said, and meant more than coffee. We went back to the bench. The third pin took the hint and behaved. Outside, a child laughed at something true. The bell dozed. The sun made a long rectangle across the floor and promised to come back tomorrow. I looked at the open door, the easy bolt, the key that now wore a small red thread, and thought. Not with fear, not with the old twitchy anticipation, but with a steadiness I hadn't believed I'd earn. If you catch someone, let them go. They come back on their own. And I did.